Ultimate stands at the pinnacle of challenge in FF14's hierarchy. They are considered by many the highest achievement you can accomplish in the game, on release often presenting 18-minute endurance tests of picture-perfect gameplay between you and the rest of your raid group. They're hard, they require a lot of learning, and their execution requirements are high. You get a cool title and a glowy weapon at the end, and likely a big ol' sense of pride. But FF14 players love a challenge, and when the developers present one to them, they will inevitably find a way to not only defeat it, but to utterly destroy it down to its base components, leaving nothing left. They dismantle it, make a mockery of it, and post it on YouTube for all to see. It started when the Omega Protocol Ultimate was cleared on patch without a single healer to expose the long-standing issues with damage profiling and healer design in the game. And now, two of the game's most iconic fights, Dragonsong's Reprise Ultimate and the Epic of Alexander Ultimate, have been brought low in the same way. Let's talk about them. Before we jump in, if you appreciate breakdowns of challenge runs in FF14, please do consider subscribing, I really do appreciate it. The Epic of Alexander originally released all the way back in 2019, and at that time it was the only ultimate to come out in Shadowbringers, producing a new standard of difficulty for the game. The Enigma Codex, a hidden buff groups had to find against overwhelming odds by piecing the scant clues together to be in with even a chance of surviving the final phase. This was where that buff was introduced. It was a point of frustration for many and led to somewhat of a sour taste for some of the cutting edge groups. It was also my first hardcore blind progression of an ultimate, and whilst my group placed fairly well, I still remember those hours bashing our heads against the codex wall. This fight isn't easy on healers, with party-wide debuffs that need cleansing rapidly to prevent a wipe, multi-boss phases with brutal auto-attacks and tank busters, and more trios that love to split up the party. This week, it was defeated without any healers at all. The successful group opted to bring 4 tanks and 4 DPS, committing to 2 paladins, a dark knight and a warrior. A clean spread of party healing and mitigation, as well as short and longer invulns. The goal here wasn't just to push out as much damage as possible. In the current day, T-checks are already lenient enough, and the design of the fight prevents skipping at multiple pain points. Instead, it was much more important to provide sustain and shielding to the party on demand. The DPS composition supports this too, hitting 4% of the party buff that they can obtain without healers, but providing tools such as Mantra, Radiant Aegis, Improvisation, and Vercure. The first phase has a bit at the end that will prove insurmountable. 6 cleanses in quick succession, and if failed, those players would die. Without a Suna, it will prove a bit difficult to pull off. Luckily, the solution to that is pretty simple. There is an existing strategy known as Dull Skip. It's risky and requires the party to be capable of timing their buffs well and executing a nice clean burst window, but it's consistently doable and will allow them to circumvent the problem entirely. So the way this works is that the Living Liquid phase is mostly spent fighting 2 separate enemies, right? The main body and the hand. You're forced to keep them roughly equal because of the periodic Hand of Pain cast that will pulse for massive damage if you focus on just one. But that's exactly what they do. They hold their raid buffs until after the split, and then focus their damage entirely on Living Liquid, ignoring the hand entirely as well as the dolls mechanic that spawns shortly after. At some point partway through all this, one of the Hand of Pains will go off, which they'll need to heavily mitigate. That's the source of the massive damage they're taking here. They need to kill it before the dolls enter a failure state, or before the next Hand of Pain happens, or they wipe. Phase 2, Brute Justice and Cruise Chaser, isn't all that special either. Getting through this phase without healers is just the product of careful mitigation planning and spot healing from the party. The damage check will become a little tighter as a direct result of this, because so many GCDs are moved away from dealing damage and into keeping everyone safe and alive. Because there's an even 4-4 split of supports and DPS, the Nisi buffs should apply as intended, without any additional alterations, assuming everybody is alive, meaning that the phase for the most part plays out exactly how you may have seen in Party Finder, using similar strats and mechanical executions. They use a pre-positioned lineup in temporal stasis to easily point out priorities of which player goes where. This mechanic, for all intents and purposes, is just a case of CD buff, stand in spot, and then wait and let thing resolve, and it offers ample time to get to that final position. Luckily, tank busters for the most part have been a non-issue so far, and Alexander Primes will be no exception. With so many tank cooldowns and invulns to play around with, dealing with these are the least of the group's problems. Inception Trio and Wormhole Trio are mostly the same as well. These mechanics are mostly dealt with in a role-agnostic manner, and will target either randomly or based on positioning relative to certain factors, so it's easy enough to shuffle around roles and have them working just fine. At the end of Wormhole, there is a stack damage that could well prove problematic, so instead of attempting to heal everybody in time from all over the room, they opt to instead share it between just the 4 tanks alone with some cooldowns. They're going spare anyways, and save what could easily have become a headache. At the end of Phase 3, there's a big healing check against Brute Justice and Cruise Chaser. Normally you'll kill Cruise first because it's casting an Enrage, healing through BJ's attacks and dealing with him after. They opt for the opposite, investing potions and 2 minutes to nuke BJ, dealing with Cruise after. It tightens the DPS check on their shoulders exponentially, but it reduces the healing component as well. Because of their composition, Limit Break is absolutely doomed. The party will not have LB3 before the mandatory tank LB, but this is solvable too. The DPS one by one sacrifice themselves, receiving a raise and holding onto it until the raid wide goes off, before then instantly raising. The tanks once more pop every defensive cooldown and party shield they have, and just about live through it. Funnily enough, I've used this exact strategy in Party Finder before, and it works really well and is very consistently achievable if you're able to get everybody on the same page during the attempt. At one point they considered attempting to keep the summoner alive through all this, stacking mitigations on them as well as a vitality potion to increase their overall health. But this solution is much easier to actually execute and doesn't heavily impact the final phase, considering players can handle the DPS check. Final phase is quite simple as well. Final Word and Fate Calibration are what you see is what you get, and the tank busters are a complete non-issue. All they have to do is survive trines and deal enough damage to meet the check with 4 DPS weaknesses. With that, T is done with no healers. Whilst this challenge is more of a compilation of cheese strats and methods to circumvent the intended solutions of pain points, rather than introducing too much in the way of new tech, it's still a really fun and interesting watch to see it all come together like this. Congratulations to the group that accomplished it. The second victim is Dragonsong's Reprise, arguably the most iconic FF14 raid of all. Its Ultimate World Race is arguably the culmination of the game's streaming category, bringing together so many in a tale that interwove lore with fanfiction and the toughest challenges that were present in the title at the time. It gave players an opportunity to save Harshathon, and in turn discover how such actions could have their own unexpected sprawling consequences. This too was beaten with no healers, but with a twist to make it even more impressive. They did it with no healers, but also investing 0 healing GCDs on live players. The only healing GCDs they used at all were on Harshathon halfway through the fight. To pull this off, mitigation needed to be perfect. The composition was similar to that of the T-Clear, 4 tanks, 4 DPS, though in this case the spread was slightly different. All 4 tanks are represented here instead of just 3, with Gunbreaker taking up a spot in this run. They open up with some early limit break cheesing, a resource that they'll desperately need later on in the fight. The rest of the first phase plays out by and large as you'd usually expect, with the excess tanks filling into the positions that healers would normally take. One huge benefit for the group here is that Dragonsong's Reprise likes to do a lot of randomly targeted, role-agnostic mechanics, and in challenge runs such as this, using non-standard compositions, it doesn't force you to think outside the box too hard. So they are ending the First Thordan encounter and progressing into Nidstinian with 2 bars of limit break quite confidently, having carefully handled many of the high damaging trios with careful mitigation planning, and otherwise having fallen into what is essentially habit in most of their strategies. By this phase it becomes clear, in order to pull all of this off in the way they have, there is a very careful plan in place when it comes to buddy mitigation. Actually progressing through this, getting the muscle memory down and eventually getting the clear took over 70 hours. Tanks are throwing heals coming out of raid wides onto those DPS that cannot easily top themselves, and there is a plan for which tank will cover which DPS with intervention or their short cooldowns. You'll see them doing exactly this for Nidhogg towers to ensure that the damage spiking out isn't insurmountable. Nothing is wasted at all. That's the way it has to be in order to work. By the time they move onwards onto the I phase, they are pushing Limit Break 3, which they will require afterwards in order to save Haurchefant. The Limit Break cheesing they've done here and there has done its job perfectly. Here, they ensure that the tanks are soaking the painful yellow orbs and letting the DPS focus on the less painful variants, which makes it all the more easy for the upfront heal from tools like Shake It Off to do its work and fully top the raid going into dives. Moving on to the intermission phase where they save Haurchefant, the group invests their first and only healing GCDs into keeping him alive to continue the fight. Aside from that, it's business as usual. Tank buddy mitts on DPS, carefully planned mitigations and free healing or shielding to deal with raid wides, as well as precise safety gameplay. The Limit Break cheesing continues at the start of Phase 5, but this time, instead of the tank sharing busters, it's the DPS taking auto attacks to the face to put them into critical healing range. A bit further on, in Double Dragons, the reasoning for this persistent Limit Break cheesing even after saving Haurchefant becomes clear. They are going to use a tank Limit Break 2 on Wrath Flame. This mechanic has the raid baiting these puddles whilst dodging exploding fireballs, but each and every puddle bait is a stack that deals massive damage. Handling this without any healers or healing GCDs was an insurmountable task, so to lessen the stress they work earlier on in the fight to build up a limit break they can expend here for the free mitigation. With this, it becomes manageable. Another interesting strat they use here for the light party stacks that are taken periodically. These usually target healers, but without any healers in the raid, the team needed to come up with a different strategy. What they do here is split into pairs and utilise buddy mitigation on the DPS once more to make the stacks survivable with 2 players, and it works a treat, as you can see here. At the end of the phase, going into the transition to Dragon King Thordan, they are tested yet again, and you can see how close they come at times, but the planning pays off and they make it through to the last phase, thanks in no small part to a well-buffed improvisation from the dancer. In Dragon King, you have likely heard debate between strats 611 and 332, referring to the number of players that will stack up for these stacks here. It's possible to circumvent extra players by having a tank stand inside a group stack using their cooldowns, which is how 611 came to being. 6 non-tanks together, then a tank in each of the others. Well here, they use 111. 3 tanks, 1 in each stack with cooldowns, and everybody else stands outside in order to passively regenerate precious HP for the Giga Flares and Trinities, because they will certainly need it. In fact, the check is so tight on the party that even despite their time invested and their planning, the monk at one point still dies during one of the Giga Flares of the phase. Luckily, this defensive comp fields both a red mage and a summoner, and in the current landscape Dragonsong's Reprise is lenient enough to allow DPS deaths and still be very comfortable to clear. Because of this, it doesn't cost them as heavily as it could. Then it's just a simple race to the finish line. At this point, I'm pretty sure that the only old ultimate left standing with no healers is Ultima Weapon Ultimate, and that's because of the hard-coded forced healer LB that nobody has found a way to cheese so far. You can't res cheese it or nuke the DPS check to get through. Leaving would be challengers at a loss. Maybe somebody one day will be ingenious and find a way to circumvent it, but for now, that's where we lie. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please do consider supporting my Patreon or becoming a YouTube member like these fine folks. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.